Pro-life talk. Real-world answers. This is Life Report.
Welcome to Life Report. I'm your host, Josh Braun. We're here with special guest, and has been a guest on our show before, John Gerardi.
Hello.
Who is almost graduated from Notre Dame Law.
I'm like 5/6 of a lawyer.
Almost there.
Almost there.
And, of course, Jonathan Keller,
Yes.
political expert. Every time we do anything on politics, and politics is what we are doing today.
And I do have to say that we had to record this episode at the beginning of January because by the time this airs, John, Notre Dame Law School student and Notre Dame University grad, will be either the happiest or the saddest man in America because of the national football game results.
Oh, yeah, the national championship game.
Yes.
Notre Dame. Go Irish, beat Bama.
All right.
I thought that was going a different direction.
Catholics.
I'm
No,
very
versus
disappointed.
cousins.
That's what it is. So.
All right.
All right, Life Report fans may remember John Gerardi. He was on several years ago. We were responding to when President Obama came to Notre Dame to speak, and there's a whole hoopla about that. So John came on to talk about that, and then more recently, literally the day after the HHS mandate decision by the Supreme Court was made, John was on here giving us an expert analysis of the decision itself. And we recorded like hours of bonus audio that we ended up never publishing, which is really, really sad to me still in my mind. And we just slaved in here.
Some of that stuff was hilarious.
I know, and just great, but no one will probably ever see it. Anyway, we are here to talk about a couple of things, and the first of which is an update on the HHS mandate, and specifically the lawsuits that different religious entities have been suing over to try to get an exemption from having to pay for different types of things in their insurance coverage. You've been doing a lot of work on this subject lately.
Yeah, I'm going to be writing a big law school note for my journal that I work for, Notre Dame, the Notre Dame Journal of College and University Law, about the HHS mandate, and particularly because I'm writing for the Journal of College and University Law, how it affects colleges and universities. But I have to do research on other entities too, such as for-profit businesses and everyone else who's suing.
Okay, so why don't you catch everybody up that's not following this on a daily basis? What kind of entities are suing and on what grounds?
All right, well, there are a lot of entities suing. So you can broadly divide it into two groups. You got for-profit businesses and you got nonprofits.
Okay.
And among the nonprofits are educational institutions, but also charities and just all kinds of nonprofits. The for-profits are just generally regular businesses like Hobby Lobby that happen to be owned by Christian or Catholic owners who object to paying for health insurance. So those are the kind of people who are suing. And they have a couple of grounds. They're sort of the way one of my professors, Rick Garnett, who has a really good blog that you should all read. Look up Rick Garnett. He sort of broke things down in this sort of three-tiered way of looking at the HHS mandate. So he says, is the mandate in violation explicitly of the First Amendment? Possibly. Generally speaking, the First Amendment's guarantees for religious liberty, they don't mean that religious groups are exempt from following generally applicable laws, and you don't have the right to disobey laws that are otherwise valid. So the fact that there are so many exemptions, though, and that it seems that certain religious groups, for example, the Amish, get a total free pass from Obamacare and the HHS mandate in general, may mean that there's some argument to be made that this isn't a generally applicable law. The second argument that's made is it illegal because it's in violation of the First Amendment Restoration Act? Now, the First Amendment Restoration Act is a law passed by Congress. It was passed under the Clinton administration. And this law, what it does basically, so the First Amendment provides a certain base level of protection for religious liberties. The First Amendment Restoration Act sort of increases that level a little bit through statute. So you can't pass a law to repeal the First Amendment or anything, but you could pass a law to repeal this statute. But no one did. And this law provides more protection than just the basic, just the First Amendment alone does. It says basically that any statute that burdens religious liberty, burdens religious belief or practice, rather, is subject to strict scrutiny. So that means that there has to be a compelling reason for imposing the burden, and that no less burdensome means are available. So it has to be well tailored to fulfilling this very compelling, important reason. If it's clear that there are less burdensome ways to go about doing this, then this is a violation of this act. And the argument for that is, in Professor Garnett's mind anyway, pretty convincing, because it's very easy for people. This is, to provide people with contraception is not that hard. For one thing, it's pretty darn cheap, and you can get it on your own. It isn't necessarily so compelling a matter that it requires, burdening all of these, different institutions. There's a huge slate of institutions. Every Catholic charities organization in the whole country, every Catholic diocese, every Christian church. I mean, there are a gazillion of these entities throughout the country who would be burdened in this way.
Now, is there a church exemption? And if so, help me understand what exactly the church exemption is.
Okay, so there is a religious exemption, and the problem is that the religious exemption is so narrow that Jesus Christ himself would not have his ministry, if you want to call it that, when he was walking around in Palestine in the first century. His ministry would not have fit.
Why specifically? Stick with Jesus Christ.
Okay,
why would his
so
ministry?
who is Jesus Christ ministering to? Who is he preaching to? Who is he ministering to?
Everybody.
Everybody,
much,
exactly.
Right?
And because
it wasn't just a certain sect of
it wasn't. It wasn't solely. I mean, he was had a missionary spirit because he was nobody was Christian when he started, and sort of by definition. So because his ministry was healing the sick, anybody who came to him who was sick, because his ministry involved teaching to
versus
anybody
only
versus
the
just stuff involved. So the religious exemption, I think it requires something like some very, very high percentage of the work that your entity does has to be focused on your people who are in your same religion. If that is the case, then you can get an exemption. The problem is that let's take one of the most common examples of organizations the HHS mandate would affect. So a Catholic hospital, St. Agnes. St. Agnes takes in anybody. I mean, they'll treat you. You don't have to be Catholic to get in.
You don't have to bring a crucifix.
You don't have to be walking in with a rosary and a crucifix and a picture of John Paul II on your chest. So because of that, and so because of this desire to help more people, it's like you're being penalized because you have this more sort of missionary outlook. Now, we talked about what kinds of entities would be restricted? Probably like, very enclosed in individual churches might be exempted. But that still leaves a huge number of churches that don't get an exemption.
And the other thing, as I understand it, is that it would basically, at best, it would limit it to churches, generally speaking, and that would be it. And granted, I mean, there's a lot of churches in the United States, but it would limit them basically to only those functions or ministries, like you said, that would be focused on, I think when I was reading it, it has something to do specifically with, teaching or catechizing your own followers.
Yeah.
So in other words, a Catholic church might be exempted, an individual Catholic church, right, but not if that Catholic church is running a soup kitchen, for example.
No. So every Catholic charities organization, and even, the Catholic diocese, the Archdiocese of New York is one of the plaintiffs in one of these lawsuits. So there are these dioceses who are, going to be affected by this.
Right.
They're Catholic universities and Protestant universities. You know,
for Protestant listeners, and your brother went to Biola, didn't
That's
he?
right.
Yeah,
That's right. I know Biola's suing.
Yeah. So
as is Notre Dame. Yeah.
a group like that, even though Biola is, if you don't know, BIOLA, it's the Bible Institute of Los Angeles.
Right.
But
that's what it stands for.
Yeah, that's what it stands for. But they are not religious enough to qualify for an exemption. It's not just like some, you could make a case that, well, Stanford or Princeton, even though they were founded as a Christian university 400 years ago, but
even Biola is having to, So let me ask you this. So you've got non-religious entities like Hobby Lobby suing to have Christian owners. So you've got nonprofits, everything from Notre Dame, Biola, educational places, but then you've even got nonprofits like Priests for Life suing. Now, Priests for Life just got an exemption. So help me understand why they won their exemption, and why is it that Hobby Lobby did not?
Okay, well, I think sort of the general idea of how courts are sort of looking at this. All right, now let's talk about what exactly was won.
Okay.
They won an exemption from following it until a higher court finally actually decides the question.
It's more of an injunction.
It's more of a temporary deal.
Okay.
To you don't have to follow this while the question's being disputed.
But Hobby Lobby did not get that.
Hobby Lobby didn't get that. And this sort of goes into a more general thing. The courts are less likely to take arguments that this is a burden from for-profit businesses, because there's sort of this attitude, well, okay, these religious entities, these are more similar to the kinds of things that are exempted already under the HHS mandate. So they're already religious organizations. They're trying to do things religiously, blah, blah, blah. So they have obviously a stated sort of moral code, and this is something that is a huge burden against their very nature in some sense. Whereas a for-profit business, the courts sort of look at them as, well, look, you're in this... You're not in the business of religion. You're in the business of business. Your goal here is to make money. You're hiring people of all stripes, and you're hiring them regardless of their religious backgrounds for the most part. These people might need contraception. Need whatever. This is how the courts are viewing it, not me. And the idea that you're being so heavily burdened by this imposition, when really this isn't really the part of the ethos of what your business is.
It seems different.
It's a different sort of thing. But then people counter this with saying there's people dislike that attitude, and people scholars in the legal field dislike this sort of attitude of businesses being these sort of amoral actors.
Right.
And there's this whole movement of ethics and business ethics and blah 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 and having principles. So do we really want to justify forcing a business that God forbid has a religious grounding, and the owners say who have more than 50 employees or whatever it is, no, I don't want to provide contraception for my employees. I'm happy to provide them with health insurance. I just don't want to pay for something I find morally objectionable. That seems a little absurd.
It still seems like a religious liberty issue.
It is. Yeah, I would say so. But it seems as though the courts, as far as these sort of temporary injunctions are concerned, are not really buying it.
Well, and I think it's frustrating because this is one of the things that came up in the election a lot last year, just generally speaking, is that a lot of times there seems to be two prevailing opinions on what is a business, what is a corporation. We saw that this is getting a little bit into the legal weeds, but we saw it in Citizens United, where basically they said, well, a business can choose to take a position on a certain issue politically.
Right.
And I think the reason for that at its core was because the court held in Citizens United basically that a corporation is really just a collection of people. Just like in a lot of ways, even though there's a doctrinal statement and everything, a church is really just a collection of people in a lot of ways. It's a group of people that come together and choose to worship a certain way. Well, a business is a group of people that come together and, generally speaking, under, like you said, under a certain moral and ethical code, they agree they're going to abide by these rules, we're going to do these certain business practices. And it does seem amazing, especially you feel bad for the people who own Hobby Lobby, who founded the company, at least from everything I've heard, they have a very strong, Christian faith.
I think it's Mennonites who
I think maybe so.
Yeah.
But it's just, could you imagine, you've suddenly become so successful, you start a small business that grows and grows and becomes more successful, and then all of a sudden the government tells you that because you've been successful, you can now no longer choose to,
And now they're paying $1.3 million a day. Today is the second that we're recording this, so at this point they've paid $2.6 million in fines for the religious principles. Okay, so I already know we're not getting to our second topic this episode. We're going to record a second one. I want to ask you a couple of forest questions and then get more specific, get more of the trees about Priests for Life and Hobby Lobby. Okay, so real quick, how many entities roughly are suing at this point?
There are 43 cases. And over 110 plaintiffs.
Wow.
So,
okay.
Yeah.
And what's the once again forest question? What is the general status? Is it looking good? Is it looking bad? We've only talked about two of them, and one won and one didn't. What are things looking like right now?
Well, they are sort of representative. Things are looking better for nonprofits than they are for for-profits.
Okay.
And it's kind of for those general sort of reasons I've talked with you about. Ultimately, though, I think these questions are going to wind their way up to the Supreme Court, and hopefully there'll be some sort of unanimity and clarity on the question coming from the Supreme Court. And
so I imagine people hearing that answer would say, but wait a minute, the Supreme Court already ruled on this. They already would have considered the religious liberty implications of their decision. So why would the Supreme Court be, doing another thing
because the Supreme Court only rules on what is directly put in front of them. With the
generally speaking,
well, that's what they're supposed to do.
Exactly.
That's what they're supposed to do. And in the case of looking at the Affordable Care Act, they were tasked with looking at is the individual mandate unconstitutional? Is this a violation of the Commerce Clause? So they restricted what they were talking about. For the most part, to those questions. The question of the HHS mandate burdening religious liberty, First Amendment questions were not brought up to the court at that time, and so the court did not address them.
Because really, as I understand it, the Attorney General, Ken Cuccinelli, who was arguing it, was basically hoping that if you get the Supreme Court to rule on the Commerce Clause, it takes out all of Obamacare, not just an exemption for religious organizations.
Yeah, well, there were a couple of options of what could have happened. They could have thrown out the whole thing, which is what 4 of the justices on the court were ready to do, other than Roberts. They could have just struck down the individual mandate, which probably would have crippled it, and they would have had to start over from scratch, or they would have did what they did, which was upheld it. So.
Okay, so let me head this direction then, and I know we wanted to talk more about why are certain religious groups like the Amish completely exempt while Catholics are not. But let me start this way. I had posted a story on the Life Report fan page, facebook.com/prolifepodcast. You should subscribe, about the Priests for Life winning their injunction, last week. And one of our kind of long-term fans, Michael from Tulsa, Oklahoma, he basically said, okay, does this mean that Scientologists will get an exemption for all the medical treatments that go against their religion? Because it seems like it wouldn't be fair if they didn't, but Priests for Life did get this exemption. So why don't you directly answer his question, and then we can get into other groups. Because as far as we know, the Church of Scientology has not.
Right, and that's sort of the crux of the issue, is that Priests for Life is actually suing about this, whereas the Church of Scientology isn't.
And why do you think that is? Because I was doing some research on this, and the Church of Scientology is like one of the most litigious groups, religious groups there is. I can think of a couple possible reasons, but do you have any,
I don't know. Those guys are so wacky. I'm not sure. I mean, they can't say that. Okay.
As a Catholic,
I'm not quite as versed inside. Are they opposed to health insurance?
I was doing some reading. I read for a half an hour on this. It seems it's a little bit hard to tell, because sometimes what's on their website is not what you end up finding out if you become a Scientologist.
Right.
But it seems that they are against many medical treatments, particularly medicines that could have any effect on your brain.
Right.
So versus like the Catholic Church is pretty much contraceptives, abortions, sterilizations. They don't want to cover those. Like maybe Scientologists would probably be a lot more, but then maybe with the Amish it'd be everything.
Okay, well here's with the Amish. All right.
Okay.
The Amish got a special carved out legislative exemption, like them specifically. So, and it's because probably because they think all health insurance, they don't believe in having health insurance. So the Obama administration made an exception, sort of carved out an exception in the law for them specifically. Now, this goes into the sort of First Amendment questions. So it seems like is this actually generally applicable law if it's carving out all of these exemptions for, and not just for different religions, but also for, labor unions and for various other sort of entities that don't want to be bound by the restrictions of Obamacare.
That's one of the things that just very quickly that I think is important that a lot of people don't realize is that they just hear the religious side of it. And very often you hear people say, well, especially people that are, maybe not, I want to be clarified, not all atheists, not all agnostics, but some that are particularly maybe callous to this issue will say, well, I don't care, you shouldn't be allowed to impose your beliefs on your employees. However, it's exactly that. It's not just the Amish that have got an exemption, but there are many for-profit businesses and corporations, unions, individual businesses, sometimes allied with certain powerful members of Congress, like Nancy Pelosi's husband's business in San Francisco, that get an entire waiver, not just from the HHS portion of the mandate, but from having to be subject to Obamacare at all.
And especially the religious stuff is a bit troubling because it seems like certain kinds of religions are sort of being targeted. What do you mean by that? Well, religions that have a more missionary, active presence in our country, and particularly in the public square. The Catholic Church, Protestant churches, particularly evangelical Protestant churches that Mormons too, who have, who have a big impact on American culture and have that impact in part through these nonprofit charitable arms of their various religions, including universities. And it seems as though the Obama administration is sort of saying, well, we prefer, with this exemption, we're, with the religious exemption that is in there, we're sort of favoring, the Unitarian Church that sort of, isn't nearly as active as the Catholic Church. We favor, maybe this. So
then the question is that even constitutional? So here's my question. It's probably not a universe where an Amish person would own Hobby Lobby per se. But if an Amish person, had a huge corporation, it was not a nonprofit thing, but a large business.
Right.
Do you think the business would end up getting an exemption or no?
No, I don't think so, because the exemption is for the religion itself and for the members of that. I'm not sure what the exact language is, but my guess.
It's only 2,700 pages. You haven't read it?
2,700 pages. I haven't read it. I'm guessing the exact language is that members of a religion that do not believe in that don't believe in health insurance. It's sort of a conscientious objectors thing. So to be a conscientious objector in war, you have to think all war is per se illegal. All war is per se immoral. In this case, it's probably you have to belong to a religious group that
thinks that all health insurance is per se bad. Versus the Catholic Church, which would say no, health insurance is a good thing. We just don't want to pay for it.
Yeah, we just don't want to have to pay for
abortifacients
and stuff like that. Yeah.
Okay, so. If the Church of Scientology did do a lawsuit, do you think they would end up kind of along in the group with the Amish, or do you think that they would end up not getting an exemption, and why wouldn't they when Priests for Life seems to have won their injunction?
That's a good question. It's an interesting question. I don't know quite enough about Scientology's external activities, like do they run charities and stuff like that? That would be an interesting
Usually they just star in blockbuster movies.
Yeah, they just star in blockbuster movies and make gazillions of dollars. And they do seem to have a kind of very profit-making aspect to their religion, like that you pay them a lot of money to join. So it's an interesting question. I would probably need to know a bit more about Scientology first. But to be frank, though, I think the Church of Scientology is fairly liberal and might be kind of on board.
That was that was kind of Michael's comment, was that maybe they're opposed to paying for a lot of things.
Right. Well, they don't like psychotropic drug like Ritalin and stuff like that affects your brain. So, right. But I think they're probably pretty cool with contraception. So I'm not sure.
So we just don't know enough at this point.
We're flailing in the dark about.
All right. Any predictions, big picture, on what direction we're headed? It's been a while, and now there's been lawsuits going. Some seem to be maybe going well. Some seem to be going kind of weird, and some seem to obviously not going well in the case of Hobby Lobby. So what direction do you see this going?
It depends on John Roberts and Anthony Kennedy and what they think about it. Which is always a scary, which is sort of scary territory. So this is going to the Supreme Court. I think so. Yeah, I think it's pretty clear that these issues are going to appear before the Supreme Court.
Particularly because you now have conflicting decisions. If everything had gone one way, the Supreme Court might choose not to take it up. But generally speaking, if lower courts decide different ways.
Yeah. Well, if you have, that's one of the most clear sort of ways that the Supreme Court will agree to take a decision is if there's a big split between the various circuit courts. So, and it seems as though that's probably going to happen. And I would not be surprised if the Supreme Court took it up. And I wouldn't be surprised really either way. I think I wouldn't be surprised if Roberts held that this was an excessive burden on religious liberty. But you never can tell with Justice Kennedy, and I feel like with legal writers who predict about how the Supreme Court's going to go, everyone's 100% sure that what they think's going to happen is going to happen, and they all disagree with each other.
They have complete agreement. So, final question: what do you think people that are not suing should do? Like, besides remain educated, that's why we're doing this show. If they're thinking, okay, I want to do something, this is really, really big deal, what can I do? Talk to them for a second.
I think you should check out the Beckett Foundation and maybe think about giving them money. I think you should look at the kinds of entities that are suing and be selective, but maybe choose to give them a little money maybe. And I think you should pray. Mm-hmm. And I think you should be educated on what's going on. I guess that's just general good advice. So read the news and follow what's going on.
Keep listening to Life Report, of course. If the Supreme Court does take it up before the end of the term.
Oh, I'll call in.
At this point, I don't want to do any episodes on this topic without John Gerardi here.
Yes. Okay, sounds good.
Thanks for being here. That's your show. Have a great week.
You've been watching Life Report, pro-life talk, real-world answers. Life Report is produced by Right to Life of Central California. Visit their website at fresnoprolife.org.